Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland laying out how the revived Committee on Canada-U.S. Relations will go about its work. If you think you've seen this movie before, you're not wrong. The first version of this group was put together in 2017, shortly before Donald Trump was inaugurated. Yesterday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced he was getting the band back together again, headed by Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. You'll remember she led the renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement when she went head-to-head with Robert Lighthizer on the American side. There are reports he'll be reappointed the U.S. trade representative by President-elect Trump. Here's what's at stake. The United States is Canada's largest trading partner, with about $3.6 billion worth of goods and services crossing the border every day in 2023. Now, much of that trade goes through Ontario. The provincial government released a statement this week highlighting that Ontario is the #1 export destination for 17 U.S. states and the #2 destination for 11 others. Two-way trade between the U.S. and Ontario was $493 billion in the year 2023. Joining me to talk more about it is Ontario's representative in Washington, D.C., David Paterson. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, Michael.
So we've seen this movie before, and you have especially. You were part of the NAFTA renegotiation last time. You were an executive with General Motors Canada. So you were appointed to your current role, though, in 2023. So what work have you been doing in that time to prepare for another Trump presidency?
Yeah, it's just about a year now since I was appointed into this role, and been living here in Washington. We set out at the beginning to really make sure that we built our relationships between Ontario, and with particular focus on Republicans, and I'm very glad that we did. And so I spend much of my time on Capitol Hill, meeting with members of the different committees and the people particularly that are focused on trade. Went to the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, and our ministers come and visit here in Washington. So it's sort of a Ontario version of what you've referred to as Team Canada. We all have our own swim lanes, though, and our focus tends to be a little bit more on the things that we're responsible for. And I must say the federal government has some challenges in the areas they're responsible for right now as well.
Yeah, in your own swim lanes, but it is a giant pool that everybody really is in. And we've heard that Donald Trump has threatened 10% tariffs across the board on anything coming into the United States. Now, your Alberta counterpart, James Rajat, has said any time an American politician mentions tariffs or Buy American, we in Canada need to be very nervous. Do you feel the same way about that?
Yeah, I think we have to take it very seriously, and but this is no surprise. Mr. Trump's been talking about tariffs for the last 2 years, and so the relationships are about having those discussions as we go along. We're going to have to see how it sorts through. We're clearly hearing now that there's discussion of with the potential trifecta of success that the Republicans have had here, that there's a possibility that trade may be built into a bill on tax reduction. It could be executive orders. It could be any number of different ways. But that's really a responsibility of the federal government in negotiating trade agreements. What we focus on in Ontario is building the economy. And we have two things that the Americans really need and are really interested in to do that. And one is our nuclear power, and critical minerals is the other. And those two are really essential for building the economy. So it's very possible to have a really positive, opportunistic discussion about growing together at the same time. So that's our focus. Federal government's got three big things on its plate. It's got tariffs, it's got immigration, and it's got defense. And we're not shy in Ontario about suggesting that the federal government should really take those on aggressively to show the Americans that we're true partners, and we deserve to be inside the tent rather than outside the tent.
So what is the key, in your opinion, to dealing with somebody like Donald Trump?
Well, clearly, first, he's proven himself to be one of the more successful politicians in history with what he's just done. So, for one, give him respect. And number two, understand that we've seen in the past a very transactional approach to things, and that's fine. It's especially good if you have something to bring to the party. And that's why I mentioned that it's important to spend a whole year talking about how, for example, nuclear power can fire up and support artificial intelligence expansion in the United States. It's important to show how critical minerals can be essential for the military. It's important to show how critical minerals can be important for the electrification of the economy and my old sector in the automotive sector, which will continue on in that path as well. And I think we understand that over and above the fact that we just have this very integrated economy that is not just the auto sector, it's our food sector. And so as we see that, really, I think we'll have more of a chance to take a look at options, and we will work with the federal government to make sure that that we put options on the table that can make this a win-win and move forward and grow the economy together.
But is that a difficult job because we have a president here who not only was protectionist the first time, but has threatened to be even more protectionist going forward? And I take your point on how we do have nuclear energy on this side of the border that does benefit the United States. But ideologically, you have this president who wants everything to be within his own borders. So is it going to be difficult to try and make that case, that Ontario case, to anyone on the other side of the border or anyone in D.C. when you have the leadership that is saying everything has to come from here?
Oh, it's a hell of a challenge. Nobody's fooling anybody in that regard. There's no question. But it starts by being able to have good, informed conversations. And it really helps in having those conversations where you have something that is really needed for success on the other side of the border. The other thing we do is work a lot with businesses, and that's sort of my old turf and territory. And many of our businesses are deeply rooted here in the United States. They have deep assets within Canada. They have trade that goes back and forth, and they have a strong voice within the world in Washington and state by state with governors, et cetera. So there's a lot on the table for both parties. And as we look at it, I think there are plenty of options. But really, the real priority should be, let's get past this inflationary period. Let's grow the economy. Let's create jobs. And we are far better doing that together. So our swim lane is those areas of economic growth. The federal swim lane is tariffs and trade agreements. We'll work together to make sure that we inform people properly. But yeah, this is no picnic, Michael. This is going to be a challenge.
And is it even more of a challenge when sometimes you have the recipient of that information on the other side who maybe doesn't want to look at that information and doesn't even believe what you're bringing to the table?
I don't find that at all. I mean, every day I'm on the Hill doing 2 or 3 meetings with members of Congress, members of the Senate, their staff. Every single meeting I've been in has been a welcoming meeting, one that is genuinely interested. We have visits of congressional members planned. We've had state legislators coming to Toronto. The Premier has really personal relationships with governors, and they've been expanded. And you mentioned Alberta. They're fantastic. They're doing the same thing. The Premier of Alberta has been in the United States many times. Quebec, the same thing. So we're all doing what we need to do to remind Americans how important we are to them. And I believe that they will see that working with us is in their economic self-interest. But that doesn't help and without a hell of a lot of work.
Just before I let you go, I know there have been a lot of calls for nonpartisan approach from this side of the border, like that First Team Canada. Given the political climate that we're seeing right now in Canada, do you think it's possible for it to be a nonpartisan approach with everybody on the same team?
I think that I advise people to not spend their time watching the political soap opera, but spend their time thinking about the economics that underlies that. Because at the end of the day, really what this has been about is people's lives, their livelihood, putting food on the table. And that happens through business. It happens through economics. Try and remind people that trade is done between companies. It's not done between countries. And so that's the really important factor we got to help people to focus on. That's what we're doing. I'm actually really encouraged and optimistic that we can not only get through this period, but we can grow together. But it's going to take a lot of elbow grease, and it's going to take a lot of resilience.
Ontario's representative in Washington, D.C., David Paterson. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael.